A dying man on death row had just one final wish: to see the dog he raised behind bars. But what unfolded next, inside the cold chamber meant to take his life, would shake the prison walls, unravel secrets buried for years, and prove that loyalty can rewrite even the darkest fate. If you believe every soul deserves a second chance, then don't just watch, subscribe. Because here, every story is a heartbeat waiting to be heard. The clank of steel echoed through death row like the final tick of a clock winding down. In cell 27, Mason Hale sat motionless, 37 years old. Sharp jaw, eyes like winter sky. The kind of man who'd once filled a room with laughter, now hollowed out by a crime the world believed he committed, and a sentence that would end it all in 12 days. In the corridor, a CO's keys jingled like cruel bells. "Hale," the guard barked, "Warden wants you." Mason stood slowly, chains clipped around his wrists like cold reminders of everything he'd lost. No appeal left. No more delays. Only the ritual of the end. They walked him to a small interview room. No cameras, just a cheap table and 2 chairs. Warden Green was already there. A man of procedure, spine straight as his morals. He barely looked up. "Your final wish," Green said, sliding a form across the table. "Fill it out." Mason stared down. His handwriting had changed over the years, slower now, like it had aged along with him. He wrote 3 words. "I want Ranger." The warden blinked. "The dog." Mason nodded. Green exhaled. "You know that's not protocol. Requests are usually spiritual, not sentimental." "I know," Mason said quietly, "but I don't have family. No priest. Just Ranger. He's all I ever had." The warden studied him, then leaned back, his silence longer than it should have been. "Ranger was placed with a vet. After the trial. You've had no contact in over 7 years." "I know where he is," Mason whispered. "Please. Just 1 hour. Before they put me down like an animal, let me see the only soul who never judged me." There was something in that word, judged, that lingered in the stale air like smoke. Across the state, in a sleepy rural town called Fallon Creek, an old German shepherd limped across a quiet yard. Ranger had once been a working dog, part of the same K-9 unit Mason had led when he was a respected deputy. They'd taken bullets together, slept in the same truck, mourned partners side by side. Now, Ranger's fur was speckled with gray. His right ear flopped from an old scar. He walked with a slight drag in his back leg from a shattered hip that never fully healed. He spent most of his days under the porch of an army widow named Maggie, who fed him boiled chicken and talked to him like he was a broken veteran. Because he was. That afternoon, Ranger lifted his head. Something stirred in the air. Not a squirrel. Not a sound. A memory. His tail thumped once. Then twice. Then didn't stop. Back in the prison, Warden Green stared at the fax machine. A call had come through from the governor's liaison. Final wish requests rarely raised alarms, but this one was different. Because 7 years ago, Mason Hale had been a hero. Until he was accused of killing a teenage girl during a no-knock raid gone wrong. There was no body cam. No clear evidence. Just Ranger, injured during the incident, found days later hiding behind a dumpster, trembling, and a shattered town demanding blood. Mason had never taken the stand in his defense. Never said a word in court. Not about the girl. Not about the raid. Not about the secrets that might have saved him. He only asked that Ranger be taken care of. Now, 7 years later, as the clock ticked toward his death, that same man had asked for the one creature who could never testify, but might have remembered everything. The warden stood still for a long time. Then he picked up the phone. "Get me Fallon Creek Animal Shelter. I need to confirm if a German shepherd named Ranger is still alive." That night, Mason sat on his bunk, staring at the ceiling. The walls around him were covered in thin scratches. Not words, just marks. Like someone trying to remember days that kept slipping away. He thought of the way Ranger used to sleep curled at his feet during stakeouts. How he'd wag his tail just once when Mason whispered, "Clear." He thought of the final day. The shouting. The gunshot. The blood. Ranger had run back inside the house. Mason had followed. Then everything went black. The headlines had called him a monster. A murderer. A traitor in uniform. No one had ever asked what really happened in that hallway. Because no one ever asked the dog. Across town, in a darkened government office, a man named Warren Pierce flipped open a case file that hadn't seen light in years. Former detective, now private investigator. One of the few men who'd ever questioned the raid's legitimacy. Inside the folder, blurry photos, a torn medical report, and a copy of Mason's final request. Pierce lit a cigarette with shaking hands. He read the line aloud. His last wish is to see the dog. He stared at the file, then at the clock. 12 days. He stubbed the cigarette out hard. I'm going to Fallon Creek. The old truck rattled down a gravel road, headlights cutting through mist like ghosts of a forgotten truth. Warren Pierce hadn't returned to Fallon Creek in years. Not since the trial. Not since he'd watched a fellow officer, a good man, in his eyes, get buried under lies he wasn't allowed to fight. Now he was back, chasing the final breath of a story long considered dead. He pulled up to a weathered farmhouse just past midnight. The porch light flickered. A shape stirred in the shadows. Ranger. The German shepherd stood slowly, limping forward, tail low but alert. His ears twitched at the sound of the engine shutting off. His eyes locked onto Warren, not as a stranger, but something deeper, someone who carried the scent of a past he hadn't yet let go. Warren stepped out. Hey boy, he whispered. Ranger didn't bark, didn't growl. He walked straight up to the man and gently pressed his scarred head against Warren's thigh. Inside, Maggie poured hot coffee, her nightgown covered in flour stains from a pie she'd baked hours ago. She was 72, stubborn as stone, and the only soul who'd agreed to take Ranger when the state refused to euthanize him. Dog's never done that before, she muttered. You got Mason sent on you or something? Warren gave a slow nod. We were on the same team. K9 Unit Bravo. 2010 through 2015. I left after the case. Couldn't stomach the silence anymore. She looked at him through narrowed eyes. Why are you here? I think Mason's innocent. Always did. And if Rangers saw what happened that day, there may still be a way to prove it. Maggie laughed softly. He's a dog, son. You think he's going to get on a witness stand? No, Warren said, standing. But I think his body remembers. And maybe that's enough. The next morning, the prison warden stared across the glass into the death row yard, where Mason walked slow circles in the cold light of dawn. The request had been approved. Ranger would be brought in 2 days before execution. 1 hour. Supervised. No physical contact allowed unless deemed safe. The guards thought it was pointless. The warden wasn't so sure anymore. He'd reviewed the trial records that night, long after lights out. One detail bothered him, a mention buried in the evidence logs. K9 officer sustained head trauma. Dog was unconscious for approximate 6 hours after incident, but no one had followed up on that. No neurological scans. No behavioral evaluations. The dog was never examined. Just shelved. Forgotten. Much like the man now pacing the yard. In a dusty room near Fallon Creek, Warren opened his old storage unit. Inside, locked boxes of files, a wall map covered in pins and string, photos from old raids. And in the center, a whiteboard labeled Case 308, Ravenna Street Incident. He pulled out an envelope marked Suppressed Evidence. Inside was a single blurry photograph. It showed the interior of the house, moments after the shooting. Blood pooled on the floor. And in the far corner, hidden behind an overturned chair, was Ranger. Eyes wide. Not charging. Not aggressive. Terrified. But what stood out most wasn't the dog. It was what lay near the entryway. A second bullet casing. Not listed in the official report. Warren whispered, someone covered up a second shooter. Back at the farmhouse, Maggie watched as Warren gently lifted Ranger's paw, inspecting the old scar that never quite healed. The dog flinched, but didn't resist. Warren reached into his bag and pulled out a scent cloth, the last item Mason had handled in prison, a worn flannel shirt, folded neatly, sealed in a Ziploc. He opened it. Ranger froze, then sniffed once, twice, and whimpered. His entire body shuddered. His legs buckled slightly. Then, like something ancient awakening, Ranger let out a soft howl, long, aching, like a song pulled from a wound that never closed. Maggie dropped her mug. It shattered. What the hell was that? Warren's eyes glistened. He remembers him. 2 days later, a van pulled up to the rear gate of Valley State Penitentiary. Ranger stood quietly in the back, flanked by 2 correctional officers and Warren, who had argued his way into escorting the dog under the premise of behavioral observation. As the gate groaned open, Ranger didn't flinch. He walked through it like a soldier returning to battle. Inside the sterile visitation chamber, Mason waited, chained to a steel table. His beard had grown and patchy. His eyes were heavy, not from fear, but from years of carrying something heavier than guilt. When the door opened, everything stopped. Ranger entered slowly. And Mason, for the first time in 7 years, cried. Not like a man defeated, but like someone who finally saw home again. The guard beside him tensed, ready to intervene. But Ranger didn't attack. He didn't hesitate. He walked straight up to Mason and laid his head in his lap. Silence. No one moved. Even the cameras stopped meaning anything. Mason whispered through tears. You waited. Ranger let out a breath, like an exhale held for years. Warren stood outside the glass, jaw clenched. Because in that moment, he realized something wasn't right. The way Ranger leaned toward Mason. The way his body shifted when Mason whispered a name, Sophie. The way his tail went rigid. His ears flicked. Ranger remembered something. But it wasn't just Mason. It was the night everything went wrong. And just like that, Warren had a terrifying thought. Maybe the dog didn't just remember the man he loved. Maybe he remembered the one who pulled the trigger. The gray sky outside the prison was unchanged, but inside cell 34, something had shifted. Warren Harlow sat across from Mason, a man once condemned and silent, now raw and reawakened. A photo lay on the table between them, blurred, old, stained by time. It showed a boy, maybe 11 or 12, standing with a dog in front of a burned-down trailer. Warren pointed. That your uncle? Mason stared. His jaw clenched, knuckles white. Yeah, that's Vernon. He used to make me sleep outside with Ranger after beatings, said it was better we learned what cold felt like early. Said it toughened a man. Warren nodded slowly. Vernon's name shows up in 2 other abuse reports in the late 90s. But the reports vanished from the record by 2004. Same year your file was sealed. Mason looked up, startled. I never knew that. Warren continued. And the detective who wrote the first report? He filed a whistleblower complaint. Said he was told to bury anything that would tarnish Judge Haywood's image. Mason's breath caught. Haywood, he was the D.A. on my case. Warren nodded. Exactly. It was like someone ripped the floor out from under Mason. The courtroom he remembered, the gavel, the smirks, the lies, all built atop a foundation of rot. But no one had looked. No one had wanted to. Until now. That night, back at his motel, Warren lined the wall with evidence, police reports, burned photos, testimony excerpts, timelines of where Ranger had been moved over the years. Warren stared at the string connecting a prison transfer notice to a newspaper clipping. The date matched, and so did the name, Deputy Marshal Greg Finnegan. He had once transported Mason to court. But more importantly, Finnegan was also the handler for the K-9 unit in 2009, the year Ranger was separated from Mason. Warren circled the name. Flashback. October 2009, a storm pounded the roof of the courthouse. Mason sat cuffed in the transfer van, wrists raw, blood on his temple from an earlier scuffle with another inmate. He had asked one thing, one impossible, desperate thing. Please, just let me see my dog. Finnegan had looked back, cold. He's not your dog anymore. Then a small voice came from outside. A child, barely 8 years old, was sobbing, tugging at Ranger's leash. A woman, foster mom, maybe, was trying to calm the dog. Ranger had broken through a gate that morning and bolted down 4 streets before reaching the courthouse, frantic. The boy pointed. He's trying to get to him. Look. Ranger had pulled with everything he had, eyes locked on the prison van. His paws bled on the pavement. He howled once, a sound so sharp it silenced even the thunder. Mason heard it. His eyes lit with something primal, something that defied every cell wall and every chain. Ranger, but Finnegan slammed the door shut. You don't get that luxury. Present day, 3 days before execution, Warren tracked Finnegan to a dusty trailer on the outskirts of Shasta County. Retired now, bitter, forgotten. The man answered the door with a drink in hand and eyes half dead. You a reporter? No. Investigator. Same difference. What do you want? Warren took out a single item, an old ID tag. Rangers. Finnegan went pale. You were the last one to handle Ranger, Warren said. You separated them. Finnegan took a long drag from a cigarette, shaking slightly. That dog would have died for him. I've never seen anything like it. Wouldn't eat. Wouldn't sleep. Just waited. Why'd you take him away? Finnegan looked down. Orders. They said Mason was getting the needle. Said the dog needed to be reassigned. I tried to fight it. Hell, even lied on the paperwork. Tried to say the dog was aggressive. But they forced it. Warren leaned in. Where did he go? Finnegan reached into a drawer, pulling out an old envelope. There's a man in Oregon. Took him in. Ranger's too old now. Almost blind. But he's alive. Warren's hands trembled. Alive. Finnegan nodded. But barely. He's been waiting for something. Hell, maybe someone. Back at the prison, 48 hours to execution, Warden Briggs met Warren at the gate, skeptical. You want to bring a dog into death row? Warren didn't blink. It's his last request. You have the power to grant it. The warden exhaled. This isn't a zoo, detective. This isn't about spectacle. This is about a dying man's dignity. After a long pause, the warden relented. 1 hour. Supervised. No media. Inside, Mason sat on his bunk, hands clasped, eyes closed. The door buzzed open. He looked up, then froze. A shadow moved down the hallway. Limping. White in the muzzle. Scars on his flanks. But unmistakable. Ranger. The air between them stilled. The guards held their breath. Mason's hands trembled. His lip quivered. Ranger stopped just feet away. For a moment, the dog stared, as if confirming it was truly him. Then, with a low whimper, he moved forward. Mason collapsed to his knees. Ranger. The dog pressed his head into Mason's chest, releasing a shuddered breath that sounded like years of pain melting away. Mason buried his face into Ranger's neck. I thought you were gone. No one spoke. Not the guard. Not Warren. Not the warden. Only the silent heartbeat between man and dog, echoing louder than any execution clock. There's a kind of silence in a prison yard at night that doesn't exist anywhere else on earth. It's not peace. It's not even quiet. It's the hush of forgotten men holding on to things they're not supposed to feel anymore. Hope, pain, memory. And in that silence, the chain-link gate creaked open. Mason stood just inside the yard, arms shackled, eyes searching, breath caught in his throat. The guards had cleared the area, save for 2 posted at the corners. A small bench sat in the center. They had even laid down a folded wool blanket. And across the yard, silent, dignified, his black and tan coat now grayed with age, stood Ranger. 10 years older. His left ear half chewed from some unseen battle. A limp in his back leg. But those eyes hadn't changed. Ranger didn't bark. Didn't whine. He just stared at Mason like he had waited every single day for this. Mason fell to his knees. Not from drama. Not for effect. His legs gave out, plain and simple. The tears came hot and fast, surprising him by their violence. And then Ranger ran. Not a trot. Not a cautious approach. A full sprint. Limping, dragging one paw slightly behind, his hind legs trembling from arthritis, but still a sprint. He threw himself against Mason's chest, nearly knocking him flat. The force of it tore Mason's shackled arms forward, metal clanking against fur. Ranger pressed his head to Mason's chest and let out a single sound, half growl, half sob. Mason buried his face into the scruff of Ranger's neck and shook with every emotion he thought he'd lost the right to feel. It wasn't just reunion. It was resurrection. Warden Bell watched from a narrow window high above. He didn't smoke. He didn't speak. He just watched. And beside him stood Detective Warren Harlow, clutching a folder so tightly the edges were bent. His jaw clenched. Shepard found something, Harlow said softly. Bell didn't turn. Too late. Harlow exhaled, eyes still on the yard. Maybe not. Back outside, Mason whispered into Ranger's fur. You remembered me, he murmured. Ranger licked his chin. They said dogs forget. They said 10 years was too long. Ranger sat back, just slightly, and tilted his head the way he used to when Mason would talk to him for hours during stakeouts, as if trying to memorize every syllable. Mason laughed, actually laughed, dry and broken and stunned at the sound of it. You always knew, didn't you? You always knew I didn't kill her. Ranger's tail thudded twice against the concrete. Mason pulled him closer, resting his forehead against Ranger's. They killed her, buddy, and they let me rot. But you kept waiting. You're the only one who did. Ranger didn't move, just listened, because that's what he'd always done. In the corridor outside the yard, Harlow paced. The folder in his hand held a report, a forensic reevaluation of the bullet angle, timeline inconsistencies, and a newly surfaced statement from a man who had worked security near the alley the night of Jenna's murder. He had never been interviewed. Why? Because his report was buried. By someone high up. The statement mentioned a second man. A second voice. Someone yelling Mason's name, trying to frame him. That man was Jenna's ex-boyfriend, a narcotics officer named Kent Harlow. He had never been questioned. And now? He was missing. Inside the yard, Mason sat in silence as Ranger rested his head on his knee. He didn't care about the guards, or the cameras, or the cold. He just stared at the sky and whispered, "Thank you." Not to God, not to the system, but to Ranger, the dog who had once pulled him from a burning meth lab and now, maybe, was pulling him out of the fire one last time. Back in his office, Warden Bell was reading the report Harlow had just handed him. His hand trembled ever so slightly as he turned the pages. When he got to the last line, a signed affidavit from a retired coroner admitting he'd been pressured to fudge time of death, he sighed. He pressed a button on the intercom. "Give me the governor." Now. Ranger was asleep now, curled beside Mason on the blanket like no time had passed. Mason stroked his side, feeling the rise and fall of breath. Steady. Alive. And then, something flickered. A shadow in the yard. Mason looked up. A guard approached. He held no weapon. Just a phone. "Mason Reed," he said. "Call for you." "Warden's office." Mason stared. I don't have anyone left." The guard stepped forward and crouched. His voice was lower now, private. "It's about your case." Mason froze. The guard offered the phone. "You might want to sit down." Mason didn't take it. He looked down at Ranger, then up at the night sky, then back at the phone. He reached for it slow, then brought it to his ear. "Hello." There was silence on the other end. Then a voice. Calm. Clear. Steady. "This is Governor Elaine Turner." Mason's breath caught in his throat. "Ma'am, I just read your case file. Every page. I believe we may have made a grave mistake." Mason stood slowly, knees buckling. Ranger lifted his head. The governor continued, her voice tight with restrained emotion. "Mr. Reed, I'm issuing a temporary stay of execution. Effective immediately. You're not going anywhere tonight." Mason's eyes filled again. This time, with something else. Not rage. Not grief. Hope. Ranger barked once, loud and clear, as if he'd understood every word. The execution room at Franklin Correctional stood cold and still, bathed in sterile white light. Every sound echoed, the subtle wheeze of the vent, the clinking of a metal gurney wheel. This was a room made for endings, quiet, absolute, irreversible. Warden Ellis stood by the observation glass, his face unreadable. Outside, the final witnesses were being seated. Among them was Warren Harlow, his jaw clenched, coat still damp from the night storm. Behind him, in a seat meant for family, sat Ranger, his dark eyes locked on the door, unmoving, like he understood the weight of where he was. Mason Reed was led in, chained at the wrists, the slow shuffle of his boots heavy on the tile. His head was shaved now. He looked cleaner than he had in years, but older too, like time had finally caught up. Still, he held his posture. Dignified. Calm. He glanced through the glass. And when he saw Ranger, something broke behind his eyes. Not a tear. Not fear. Just release. A breath that seemed to carry 10 years of pain with it. The guard strapped him down. One to the left wrist. One to the right. Ankles. Chest. For needles prepped. The room felt smaller now. Father Brennan stepped forward with a Bible, but Mason gently turned his head. "No scripture," he said. "Just let me see him." Ellis gave a tight nod. A guard moved to the far door and opened it slowly. Ranger entered. At first, the dog hesitated. His paws clicked softly on the floor. But as Mason whispered, "Come here, boy," something clicked. Ranger moved forward. First slow, then faster. And then, like instinct, he leapt, planting his paws on the edge of the gurney, muzzle pressing against Mason's face. Mason chuckled, a full, real laugh. It echoed strangely in the silence. Ranger licked his cheek once, then lay his head gently on Mason's chest. Even Ellis looked away for a second. "I missed you, buddy," Mason whispered, stroking behind Ranger's ear. "You're the only one who never gave up on me." Ranger just stayed still, like he was holding Mason there, like he wasn't going to let this happen. For that moment, nothing existed but that bond. The weight of 10 years, 10,000 miles, one bullet, and a loyalty that never cracked. And then, a buzz from the wall intercom. Ellis approached. "Yes." The voice came sharp. "Governor's office." "The execution is halted." The silence after that was electric. "What?" Ellis muttered. "There's been new evidence. DNA match from a cold case 10 years back. Confession from a man already serving a life sentence in Idaho. He used to work maintenance for the apartment complex. His prints were in the updated files, just confirmed." Governors signed the stay. Effective immediately. Ellis turned slowly. "Unstrap him." The guards froze. "I said unstrap him." Mason blinked like the words hadn't registered. Ranger lifted his head, ears perked. And then Mason did something no one expected. He started crying. Not just tears, his body shook with it. The kind of sob that comes from somewhere deep, like a dam breaking. 10 years on death row. 10 years of knowing you were going to die for something you didn't do. And now, in the final hour, he was free. As the final strap came loose, Mason sat up slowly. Ranger leapt off the gurney and stood beside him, tail wagging like the whole room had just opened its windows to let in light. Ellis approached. I've never seen anything like this," he said quietly. Mason looked at him. "I have," he replied. 10 years ago, when a puppy refused to leave me after I'd been shot. Warren entered the room then, eyes wide. "It's real. The confession's real." The guy matched every detail. The mask, the broken lock, the missing earring. Everything. Mason reached for Ranger's collar. "So it's over?" Warren smiled faintly. "No. It's just starting." 1 month later, a press conference outside the governor's mansion. Microphones lined up. Cameras rolling. Mason stood in a clean gray suit, next to a woman from the Innocence Project and his attorney. But all eyes were on the German shepherd sitting beside him, tail curled around his paws, a bronze medal hanging from his collar. Mason cleared his throat. "I never thought I'd be speaking as a free man again," he said. "I never thought I'd get to see the sun without a cage around it. And I definitely didn't think the person to save me would be a dog." Reporters chuckled softly. "But Ranger isn't just a dog. He's the reason I didn't give up. When no one believed me, he did. When they said I was angry, violent, dangerous, he stayed with me. He knew something everyone else didn't. And in the end, he helped prove it." He looked down at Ranger, eyes wet again. "They say dogs don't understand justice. I think they understand it better than we do." Final scene. Mason sits on the hood of an old pickup truck parked by the beach. The sun is setting, soft, orange, golden. Ranger runs in circles on the sand below, kicking up clouds and barking into the wind. A little girl with wild curls is laughing. "Come on, Ranger. Bet you can't catch me." Ranger bolts after her, playful but gentle. Behind them, a woman walks up the hill, a woman Mason had once loved, lost, and maybe was learning to love again. Mason watches it all unfold, arms crossed, tears drying in the ocean breeze. "Turns out," he murmurs, "I had a life waiting for me." He pulls the collar from his pocket, the old one, from the day of his arrest. It's tattered now, name tag bent, letters faded. But he keeps it anyway. A reminder of everything they survived. The screen fades to black. And the last words appear. "Sometimes the only one who believes in you is the only one who can't speak, dedicated to every innocent soul still waiting to be heard.